started to realize, oh man, I'm usually working with just one storyline. I've got 4 of them here. And so obviously I'm not done with it yet. But it started to take a different turn. Rather than going for the 4 individual seasons, this painting is more about space and time. And so I'll get to that in just a second while you're still awake. I didn't realize until I actually started to lay out the sketchwork, the ancient Egyptians and most of the ancient cultures looked at time cyclically. You know, they would study the stars, and so much of what we have to come through our current culture today come from the readings of the stars, not just the astrology and the zodiac, but so many of our mythologies and our traditions and our deities and everything that have come down have become to us as a result of those that became specialists with the changing of the seasons. It became the big cosmological clock. It was more accurate to judge the position of the stars than it was to judge the changing of the seasons and the weather patterns. And so those that became proficient at it eventually became our priests that came down all through the cultures, and they were the ones that eventually set up the temples after they deified the different stars in galactic series. But they only had 3 seasons, and they were broken into 4 months. So that's why I have over here what would be summer and autumn together. I put that together as harvest. And then I have my first African girl, which is actually Egyptian, but Africa, in the Nile in the center as winter. And then this one called Hope Floats on the outside, which is spring and the rebirth and the regeneration of life. So it was, I have the wolf pup over here, which is kind of that, well, like I said, we got 15 dogs. So this, we had just a big pile of dog hair that wound up getting here, so I thought, okay, it's a perfect place to paint a wolf pup. But as it starts out, that element of harvest with hope, the egg unhatched yet, and these two together form an element that I call awaiting the call, which is that idea of hope the weather change works for us. So many of the things that we came out with, the elements of sacrifices and the deities that came up, was to help us control the things we couldn't control. Weather was one of the biggest. Again, people lived or died based on harvest. And if you had bad weather patterns, people starved. So if you can't control that element, you know, and it's that trauma of having self-awareness, as we can remember the past, and in doing so we can project the future. So therein lies stress and panic at the same time, and finding ways that we can control it. We have survived and we have evolved because we've been able to find ways to hunt. We've been able to find ways to create and work with agriculture and domesticate animals to help that because of that. But at the same time, we've tried every which way we can to control the weather. And so we've always kind of been at Earth's mercy, and we always will. I mean, we are, it's apples, you know, an apple tree, apples, and Earth peoples, I guess. But I have, moving into winter in the Nile, you can't see it till you get really close, but right back in here is a fully grown wolf, her at the time, hidden back behind the trees. And again, this is all dependent on how the harvest goes. And then the hope for the future. So I've got her boots tied back into all of the elements of, you know, I didn't want to do corn and wheat and things that they had back then because it would just look goofy. Plus there's too many little things to paint. It would drive me nuts. And so, but I wanted to tie it in here and tie her back into the water with the idea of the fish scale skirt, and she will eventually become my new character for a painting I have called Bumbleina. So I figured I wanted to bring her out and kind of dress her in a similar way of, you know, like the little bumblebee look there too. But it's that part of flowering and pollinating and everything for the new growth. And then I always use balloons as a symbol of consciousness or wisdom. And springtime, the spring equinox is really that time of rebirth and regeneration. It's when they notice that light, for the very first time, overtakes darkness. And in the ancient cultures, we had so much of this duality between light and dark. They didn't know what the sky was. It's funny, if you put yourself in a position of seeing everything for the first time with absolutely no idea of what we're looking at. All the science of the day was basically observation. And as we created stronger and better and more powerful tools to help us observe, we're still creating our science and everything else based on observation. But it's just as science evolved and the tools got better, the science got better. But I don't want to get off on a tangent on it, but I guess I will for a minute. I have another painting called Raised by Wolves. But it really, when it comes down to it, is that the great debate is not between science and religion. And a lot of people think it is, and it always comes up. But it's between science of the 21st century and science of the first century. All are based on an observation. The religions of the day have always been built on the sciences or the observation and finding answers to what we see and imagine and try to think of. And they grow and evolve, but a lot of them hit points that became static because the dogmas were set, the hierarchies were set. And it's not saying we don't have that in the science. We do, but we still continue with the challenge. We still have this battle in between the different disciplines that keeps everybody honest at the same time. I think everybody knows, follow the money and you'll follow where things start to originate. But I wanted to really, bring this back out as that element of the cyclical element of time that we used to have. Life changed. The ideas of the creation stories going to Judgment Day, we started to develop a linear structure. We started to develop it even with the idea of the Big Bang to the Great Inflation or the Great Collapse, whatever may happen. And just the daily lives of just getting up in the morning when we have breakfast, when we get the kids to school, when we have to be to school, everything we've set up becomes linear. So it's the idea, is time like a boomerang? Is time like an arrow? Or does time even exist at all? And that's just kind of what I want to bring out in this painting, is that even though, I want to bring the elements of what the cyclical time was that started it, but also bring it back to just out of curiosity, looking, does time even exist? Is it something we just created to help us monitor our systems like a clock? It's just mechanical. It just works right along the way it was supposed to, but we created it. We created it for a purpose, and that purpose was to help us keep track of something that we've also created for another purpose. But back us out of all of these things we get so familiar with and used to. It's just kind of like the wave particle process. Those experiments. The space even exists. Is everything just potential? Is time potential? It's almost like there's such a little fine line between past, present, and future that it's all just an illusion crossing over. And again, this gets more into, quantum physics, 11 dimensions, multi-universe. I guess that's for another painting. But in essence, time is the real issue that I really want to address through here. And then the rebirth and regeneration. That happens no matter what. Regardless of how we define time or how we use time in our daily lives, there is still a cycle of harvest, a cycle of, life, a cycle of death, and a cycle of regeneration and rebirth. And that's really what's going on in here. Oh, and these little things too, they were screw up. And it's one of those little happy accidents that when I saw it, this was getting kind of dark up here, but I knew I was going to do things kind of light. But when I went to wipe it off, and it looked kind of like a lens flare, I thought, wow, that could really help create a little bit of depth. And so I started doing more of them and creating them like these little leaves flying out as though they were lens flares. So there's nothing really specific about them as far as painting goes, except that I just thought it would be kind of cool graphically. And so sometimes a lot of paintings just have a graphic balance and a graphic element. And, I just kind of listen when people start to talk about what they think it means. And if it fits, I'll keep it. So, but in reality, it was a screw up that worked out pretty well. So, and that's part of the challenge with original stuff. you get the proverbial warts and all. So, again, thank you everybody. I really appreciate it. I'm not used to doing this, but I'm enough Viking and Red Bull, I can probably pull through anything. So thank you.
Will you take some questions?
Absolutely.
Where's the Viking and Red Bull?
I have a question for Wayne and Ruth. Where
Is
will
it
you-
In about 3 hours.
where will you hang it?
Where will we hang it?
Yeah, you're not gonna leave it right there.
Well, Ruth has veto power, but we said that, like I said, we bought it sight unseen. So, and if you've seen some of his work is somewhat more questionable as far as good taste goes. No, he has one where a gentleman, dare I call him, is carrying a donkey on his back as like a burden. So like he's burdened by the beast of burden. He's carrying it. But if you can imagine what it looks like if you're carrying a donkey on your back, like this.
And the lower half of the donkey is right about here.
So I'm really happy that this did not turn out like
No.
So we weren't sure
No, I've been
exactly.
very careful about how they
We weren't sure what the presentability of it was going to be, but we knew the quality would be outstanding because his work, if you can see over the years, every painting gets better, and so we were confident about that. So if it was really good, it was going to get to go here, and if it was like so-so, it was going to go in the bedroom, and if it was like, no, that's just interesting, it was going to go in the spare bedroom for the guests, and if it was like below that, it was going out with Ruth's art.
in the garage with my painting with a twist.
Where Ruth's take my numbers and paint twist out the garage. So
It was very good.
I think I'm right. It's going right here, right?
It's going right
It's
there.
going right here. So it'll be-
She's going to thank God. They're all in instruction.
I've got a question.
Yes.
I know the balloon stands for consciousness in your paintings.
Yeah.
Okay, and you explained to me earlier that birds are kind of scattered. They go in all different directions.
Right.
But I noticed when I was standing there, I never noticed before. Did she capture a bird?
No, it's the idea
What's going on?
having the bird wing is this piece. Her individually, I call it Judgment Day.
Okay.
You know, because it is the life or death. Did I ever explain what I started to circle over here and then just kind of lost my train of thought?
The brown wall.
Okay. Okay, yeah, that's the grown wolf back there. That it grows up, and it's the hidden part. And that's why this is partly called Judgment Day. And I use the dove descending because in the Gospel of Mark, during the baptism is when we see that Jesus gained his, his anointment from above through the dove. And so that's why I use that element of Judgment Day. Interestingly enough, Jesus gains his divinity in different places in every single gospel. But the Gospel of Mark, the first gospel written, it was the dove descending or the baptism. So I use that coming in. Then I have other birds following it behind, but all going in different directions. And the reason I use that is that people follow so many different forms of wisdom or different wisdom teachers, whether it's from the ancients, the moderns, or from their own life experiences. So I don't want one dove following only one direction all the time. That's why I have many doves going many different directions. And then I use the element of consciousness on this, like I say, the regeneration and rebirth, is that renewal of spirit, that renewal of wisdom that comes from the year past moving forward to the new year of harvest. It was the, and that's a lot of what the spring solstice, or the spring equinox was all about.
And the wing?
And the wing is really just a part of that, is that she takes a little bit of the wisdom from the wisdom groups that are coming down, and it's that element of wisdom from the year past, from the proverbial Judgment Day, that helps raise the consciousness for the year moving forward and the hope regenerated. And that's why her boots are tied back here to complete the cycle.
Thank you.